I'm Bill Gless. I am a classical and flamenco guitar maker. I came to Miami in 1994 when I was 23 years old, many years ago.
Hello, my name is Steven Dentone. My goal is to build guitars that have a wide range of tonal color, so the musician playing them is free to express themselves. Beauty and sound is what inspires me. That is why I want to revive the Spanish sound of the legendary guitar builders of the turn of the 20th century and reintroduce them in the 21st century while keeping in mind the modern desires for volume and projection. Please feel free to contact me if you're interested in my work. I would love to get to know you.
Welcome to Stay Tuned. I'm David Dolata. I will be your host for the first half of this presentation, and my colleague, Federico Bonacossa, will take over for the second half. The material I'll cover here will prepare you for Dr. Bonacossa's demonstration of how to use pure or just intervals in a variety of fashions. Tuning may not seem to be the most scintillating topic, however, its mastery is crucial for effective performance. We didn't always have electronic tuners at our disposal, and sometimes, especially in the middle of a performance, it's essential to know how to tune quickly and accurately without having to reach for our tuners. Pure intervals are those that do not produce beats. In equal temperament, the unison and octave are the only pure intervals. Now, taking a look at this slide, you can see that 100 cents is an equal tempered semitone and 1200 cents is an octave. A cent is just a measurement that makes it much easier than dealing with ratios. You can see we want to focus on the major third and the perfect fifth, especially the perfect fifth. Now you can see that in just or pure, the perfect fifth is 702 cents and the equal tempered fifth is 700 cents. That's not a huge difference, but that difference does add up. A larger difference is the major third. You'll notice that the pure or just major third is 386 cents and the equal tempered third is 400 cents. That's 14 cents off, which is quite noticeable. Now, Dr. Bonacossa produced the following computer-generated intervals for us so that we can easily hear the differences between the pure and equal temperament versions of perfect fifths and major thirds. So let's go through a few of them here. So here is a perfect fifth, a pure perfect fifth between C and G. You'll notice, I'm sure you noticed that it was very stable. There was no wavering whatsoever at the end of the pitch. Now let's listen to an equal tempered fifth, the same two intervals. See if you can tell the difference. Pretty close, but not quite as stable. Now let's hear the same intervals an octave higher. First pure, and then in equal temperament. So here's the pure version. And now here it is in equal temperament. Sometimes it's easier to hear such things between, with a higher, at higher pitches. The problem, as we'll see, is that the small difference between pure and equal tempered fifths quickly adds up to become a problem. Now, the difference between a pure and equal tempered third is useful because the equal tempered third is very much out of tune, which makes the beats quite easy to hear. The more out of tune it is, the faster the beats are. First, we'll listen to a pure major third between C and G. And this will sound, I imagine, pretty stable to you. Now, let's listen to the equal tempered major third, the same interval. Do you hear that wavering at the end, that regular beating? That means that it's out of tune. So the more out of tune it is, the faster the beats. So if you heard any beats with the equal tempered fifth, they were pretty slow, maybe like a wave. In a major third, in equal temperament, it beats much faster. Now, let's hear how that sounds an octave higher. First, the pure major third. Again, very stable. Now let's hear the equal tempered third. You can hear that it's somewhat unstable, and you hear a lot of noise in there, a lot of beating. Okay, now we think in terms of guitar, so let's listen to an equal tempered third alone by itself from G to B on the guitar. And this is between your second and third strings, what it normally would sound like, now that you've heard a little bit of what it might sound like, what equal temperament sounds like. Okay, now let's listen to that interval as a pure third instead, and see if you can hear the difference. To my ears, the pure third is much more stable than the other one. The equal tempered third is quite jangly. It bounces around. It doesn't seem to settle in. Now, it's impossible to have all pure thirds and fifths and be able to play in every key. Equal temperament gives up pure thirds and fifths so that you can play in every key. As a result, only the unison and the octaves are pure, and this fact must inform our tuning. Next, I'll show you how not to tune and suggest how you should tune. It's important to understand what's going on with the harmonics at the 5th and 7th frets to understand this. So the harmonics at the 5th fret are double octaves, which are also pure. At the 7th fret, the harmonics are pure fifths plus an octave. However, the fretted notes are equal tempered fifths. If the frets were set so that they yielded pure fourths at the 5th fret and pure fifths at the 7th fret, they would look like this, which you can see are not the same as in equal temperament. Now, these differences may appear to be small, and they are, but they add up just like tiny grains of sand form a beach. Perhaps the most popular method of tuning is by comparing harmonics at the 5th and 7th frets. This chart here demonstrates how that works. So you get the high E string, the top E string in tune, and then to tune the 6th string, you compare the harmonic at the 5th fret on the low E string to the open E string. From there, you tune the fifth string by tuning it up so that it's the same. The harmonic at the 5th string's 7th fret is the same as the 5th string harmonic on the E string, and then the same, so on and so forth. So the 5th fret of the harmonic of the A string to the 7th fret harmonic of the D string, and in turn, you string by string, you get it in tune. Now, for the 2nd string, the first method is that you've already tuned the E string, the high E string. So you take the harmonic at the 7th fret, and then you compare that to the harmonic at the 5th fret on the B string. So here is a recording of that. So it follows this diagram exactly, so you can hear what this sounds like. An alternate method of tuning the 2nd string is to compare the 2nd string to the 7th fret harmonic on the low E string. Here's what that sounds like. Either way, the 7th fret harmonic is a pure fifth plus an octave above the open string. So this tuning method uses pure fifths when we really need equal tempered fifths instead, because that's how the frets on the guitar are arranged. Now this method is fast and easy, but the secret of tuning by these harmonics is that it doesn't work, as you'll soon hear. Now, looking at this chart, you'll see that the open fourths on the guitar are 498 cents wide. That's a pure fourth. I mean, these sound great. Let's hear how they sound. You can hear how stable they are. It's Chuck Berry ringing a bell. It's just so beautiful, clear and pure and resonant. But the major third is super wide. See that 408 cents. Historically, this third was considered to be so wide as to be unusable. Let's hear how that sounds. Note that while each pair of strings is only 2 cents narrow from equal temperament, the cumulative wideness increases as you get to the third string. You can hear how the tuning of octaves gets progressively worse as you go from the octave above the open E on the 6th string to F, G, etc. up until the open 3rd string. Let's listen to these octaves and notice how as we move through these octaves, the tuning gets worse and worse. The reason for that is twofold. It's because you have the cumulative distance between the low E string and the other strings increases as we move up to the 3rd string, and then anything involving that third between the 2nd and 3rd strings is horrible because that open string, that third, is so incredibly wide. You can also hear this pretty well if we hear a 1, 4, 5, 1 in G major, so G, C, D, and G. Now, the same basic issues prevail when tuning by open strings because our ears tend to gravitate toward pure intervals. This is one of the reasons bowed string instruments are so often out of tune. They tune their open strings to pure rather than equal tempered intervals. So our ears tend to gravitate toward pure intervals. And so when you tune, naturally you do your ear tries to adjust to pure intervals. But again, the problem is that equal temperament doesn't use pure intervals. It uses equal tempered intervals. Now I'll discuss tuning methods that involve only octaves or unisons, or harmonics that produce octaves or unisons. Now when you're tuning, you want to start with the top string, the highest string. And I recommend that you use a 440 if you're, say, using a tuning fork. Why? Well, because the rest of the world does it, especially if you're playing with an ensemble. You really want to be tuning with them. So since that's what everybody does, you should do that too. And also because it works. All tuning refers back to the starting pitch. Perhaps it's not as important in equal temperament, but it's essential in any other tuning system, and especially when you're playing with other instruments. If you start with E and they start with A, you'll be a little bit off with them. And as we've seen, those cumulative differences start to cascade. Another reason to start with the highest string is that it's easier to tune higher pitches more accurately, and thus you have less of a chance of making an error early in the process that will compound as you go. So it's best to start from the first string rather than the other way around. Now, this method that you see here is the standard, probably one of your first lessons. You got this. And basically, now usually people start from the sixth string, but you want to start from the first string. So you get the E string in tune by your tuning fork or whatever. Keeping in mind, we're talking about acoustic tuning methods here. I'm sure we all use our tuners when we can, but we can't always do that. So you get the E string in tune, and then you compare the open E string to the E at the 5th fret of the B string, and then once the B string is in tune, you compare that to the 4th fret on the G string to get that in tune, and so on and so forth. Now, of course, once you get that all in tune, it's a real good idea to try those octaves that I played, as well as some choice chords, especially in the keys that you're going to be playing in, to make sure everything sounds good. So another thing that can help you is going back and forth between pitches. So comparing, let's just do the first string to the second string. So the timbre, in other words, the sound quality, the tone between the open E string and the stopped or fretted note on the B string at the 5th fret, it's going to be a different timbre, slightly different sound. So it's a good idea, say, to play the E, the open string, which tends to be brighter. Play that a little bit more toward the rosette, so that it sounds a little bit more like the stopped string. Another thing that's very helpful is to play the notes back and forth. Play one of the pitches and the strings and then the other, and then repeat that and go backwards. So first string to second string, and then second string to first string. Doing that makes it much easier to hear what's going on. Oh, and the other thing too, whatever you do, don't hold the 5th fret or the 4th fret, whatever, and then reach over and try to tune with your right hand, because from an audience standpoint, it looks awful. Look at this. I mean, that just doesn't look right. You need to try to memorize what that pitch sounds like. It's only going to be for a second that you're going to be away from it, so you can memorize that. And you want to get good at this. And I know it's very easy to not do this and reach for our tuners because, well, it's so convenient. But this can really save your bacon if you're in a performance situation and you need to tune fast. Here's how the tuning by 5th and 4th frets sounds. This method is the fastest and most accurate method, I believe. I learned this from my professor at the College Conservatory of Music, Claire Callahan. And here's how this one works. Is you tune the E string, the highest string of course, and then from there you use the 12th fret harmonics. The 12th fret harmonics are very loud and they're very stable, and they are pure. Remember, octaves are the only pure intervals in equal temperament, so you can use them. So you start off by comparing the 7th fret fretted note on the E string, which is a B, to the harmonic at the 12th fret on the B string. Then you play the G on the E string, the highest E string at the 3rd fret. Compare that to the open fret, the 12th fret harmonic for the open G string. Then the D on the B string, the fretted note with the D harmonic. the A on the second fret of the third string with the open string harmonic at the 12th fret on the 5th string, and then the E on the D string, the 2nd fret, fretted note with the harmonic at the 12th fret. The thing is, with this method, is it's very easy to hear because those harmonics are loud, particularly when you're in a situation where it's noisy or you're on stage. And the other thing is that this method is very, very fast. So if you fret the notes with your first finger and then hit the harmonic with your fourth, you can get that going very, very fast. I can't recommend this method to you enough. It's fast and accurate. Here's how that sounds. One of the main impediments to good tuning is a phenomenon called sharpening. So the higher the action on a guitar, the sharper the note sounds. And higher tension strings have the same effect. So a little bit of geometry, you can see here that the higher the string is, the greater the farther away from the fret your finger lands. And so that means that the distance, as you can see, between this the shorter height and the greater height, with the greater height, the string is pressed closer to the bridge from than if it were a lower tension, or not lower tension, lower action string. So the most common and obvious offender is the 7th fret E major bar chord that you hear people play, and that is usually very out of tune. Let's hear that. The main problem is because of the E on the 3rd string, because the because the 3rd string is the densest of the unwound strings, and therefore it tends to sharpen the most. So here it is by itself. I'm comparing the 3rd string E to the open E, and you'll hear that the 3rd string E is noticeably higher than the open E, and that's why that chord always sounds so wretched. The moral of the story is to avoid high action and high tension strings if you want to play more in tune. The other thing you can do is get a compensated saddle. You can see there are all kinds of them, but you can see the illustrations here, and what you'll notice is that the 3rd string is placed, the contact point is placed farther toward the bottom of the guitar, and so what that does is that lengthens the strings. And so in this illustration in the middle with the green, the bottom one, saddle, bridge saddle, is facing toward the saddle from, say, from the nut. And so you can see that where the 3rd string contacts the saddle, it's farther back than the 2nd string, and the 2nd string is farther back than the 1st string. So those are the main offenders, and there are these. You have some other views of these, and there are a variety of ways of dealing with this, but this makes a huge difference in playing in tune with hardly any effort whatsoever. These compensated saddles are available all over the internet, so you would have no trouble Googling them and getting one sent to you right away. And there's nothing to replacing the saddle. You just loosen your strings and then tighten them up again. You can find out more about this subject in my book, Meantone Temperaments on Lutes and Viols, which is available in hard copy and in a very inexpensive ebook. There's a link to it at the end of the presentation. While the book focuses on lutes and viols, much of it can be easily applied to guitar. Now, on to Federico Bonacossa.
Hi, my name is Federico Bonacossa, and I'm going to be discussing some strategies for performing pure intervals on guitar. So, just a couple words about the notation. There's various ways that you can notate microtones. One common way is to use various types of accidentals. There's quite a few different types, so that can be a little bit confusing sometimes. So instead, what I will be using is a somewhat simpler system that uses numbers to indicate the deviation in cents above a note. So here are the first few notes of a harmonic series notated using the system that I just mentioned. So before we get into some more details, let's take a moment to discuss natural harmonics and how they are different from artificial harmonics in guitar. So natural harmonics are any harmonics that use an open string as the fundamental. Some examples of natural harmonics are the ones that I have notated here. So they are D, F sharp, E, and A. Another common way to play harmonics is using what we usually refer to as artificial harmonics. So artificial harmonics are really not much different than natural harmonics, except that instead of using open string as the fundamental, they use a stopped note, but otherwise they work exactly the same. So if we take for an example an open A, the very first harmonic is the one found on the 12th fret, which is halfway through the length of the string. So that's a very strong harmonic, and it sounds an octave higher than the fundamental. So you can do the same thing with a stopped note by just pressing, for instance, a C on the 5th string, and then just pinching the C an octave higher, which corresponds to the new halfway point, and then using a different finger, just plucking the same note. So you get essentially the same effect as what you would get with an open A touching on the 12th fret. So in other words, you're essentially shifting what the 12th fret used to be to a different position, and now that makes it versatile because you could do any note. So another type of artificial harmonic are the ones shown in example 6, which are touch perfect fifth harmonics, and they are not a whole lot different. They essentially work the same way, except that instead of touching an octave higher like we did before, we now touch a perfect fifth higher, and the harmonic we get this time is an octave and a perfect fifth higher, which is the same thing as playing. So this note here, if I start on an open E, the third note is an octave and a fifth higher than the open string, and so this is exactly the same thing, except now because I'm pressing it down, I can play any harmonic that way. You can also play touch 4 harmonics, touch major third harmonics, touch minor third. So there's various ones, and they all give you different results, but they actually are exactly the same thing that you would get using open strings, so using natural harmonics. So here's just the chart with some of the most common natural harmonics on guitar. Now it's important to note that the higher the harmonic is, the more places it can be played. So for example, the third harmonic, which let's say from an open E is the third note that you see of example 7, that B right here, that can actually be played also on the 19th fret. And the fifth harmonic, which is in the case of the first example is a G sharp, the one that says where it says 4th fret. The indication 4th fret is to be taken not so literally, because in reality it can be played on the 4th fret, but also the 9th fret, and also on the, let's see, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th fret, and then whatever fret this would be, I don't know, some very high fret. But really, rather than thinking of frets, one should think of proportions of the string, and that's really what's happening, because the fifth partial is 1/5 of the length of the string, and so there are 4 places where you can touch. You can find that note on 1/5 the length, 2/5 the length, 3/5, and 4/5. So let's dig a little deeper into the topic now. So I will be discussing 3 different strategies that you can use just on a standard guitar to play pure intervals. Now, of course, the best way to play all kinds of microtonal intervals would be to have a guitar that has movable frets, or perhaps one that has a removable fretboard, and those exist too, or maybe a fretless guitar. So the first strategy that I've used is to combine fretted notes with natural harmonics. So let's just take the first as an example, and I'll go through it in detail, and then I'll kind of go through the other examples a little bit faster. But essentially, if we take a perfect fifth starting from D on the second string to A, and really anywhere, it doesn't have to be on the second string, but anywhere on any two notes that are fretted, you know. So that's an equal tempered perfect fifth. We know that a pure perfect fifth is actually slightly wider, so in exactly 2 cents wider. And so the question is, how can we turn this equal tempered fifth into a pure fifth, if nothing else, just to hear what the difference is, because maybe you've never experienced what the difference is. If you go back to your natural harmonics on the D string, we know that we have the open D, and then on the 12th fret we have a D, an octave higher, and then on the 7th fret we have an A, which happens to be the same exact A as this, except that this A is actually 2 cents sharper. Why is it 2 cents sharper? Because it's actually a harmonic of the D. So it's a pure fifth between the second and the third. Which of course you can't do them at the same time, but you can't play the D because this D is actually the same, or it should anyway be the same as this. So if you play them together, you actually get a pure fifth. And then here's the equal tempo one again. So the difference is somewhat subtle, but you can, I think, tell that the pure fifth rings more. So in other words, it's just more consonant, ever so slightly more consonant. And when you do this long enough, you really begin to hear the difference pretty clearly. And if you compare those two notes, you can tell pretty easily that the A on the 4th string as the harmonic is a little bit sharper. And if you play them together, you hear a little bit of a beating, which is what happens when two notes are slightly out of tune. Now, pure fifths and equal temper fifths are not that far away from one another, but pure major thirds and equal temper major thirds are rather different. There's a difference of 14 cents, which is very, very noticeable. So here's an example of how that sounds on the guitar. So I'll play a major third starting from A on the 1st string. I'm going to also do it on 2 separate strings so you can hear how it sounds together. There's a major third. And now I'm going to play the C sharp as a harmonic of the 5th string. So here's the equal tempered, here's the pure. Here's the pure again, equal tempered. You hear the difference? It's very noticeable, right? Pure. If you do this long enough, you will begin to feel like your major thirds are always out of tune, which they actually are, technically. And of course, if you compare the C sharp on the 1st string with the harmonic, which of course you can find also on the 9th fret here, you hear a big difference between the two. The harmonic is considerably flatter. And if you play them together, you hear a lot of beating. And here, once again, are just a few more examples. I'll just play them quickly. E, G sharp, and then pure version, using a harmonic on the 6th string. And here are just a few in a row. D, F sharp, same one we had in the first example. And then the E to G sharp again. They're far more consonant. So the same thing can be accomplished using a combination of fretted notes and artificial harmonics. So here's how that works. I'm going to use as an example a B flat on the 3rd string. So in order to play a pure fifth above this, what I do is I fret a B flat an octave lower, and then I do a touch perfect fifth harmonic, because that harmonic is now exactly the right tuning. It's not just any F harmonic, because that would not necessarily work, but it's a pure fifth higher than pure fifth at an octave, to be exact, higher than this B flat over here. So as opposed to, right? It's kind of hard to do it exactly at the same time, but I suppose with practice it's possible. And then the same thing now starting from an A flat. So I now play the A flat on the third string, finger on A flat an octave lower, play the harmonic here. So again, there it is. And then the same thing from an F. It's a little bit harder. So in the bottom system, I have a more detailed explanation of how the artificial harmonic works. So you have the stop note indicated as just a regular note head, and then the pinched note shown as a diamond note head, and then in parentheses you have the sounding pitch. Now with octave harmonics, the sounding pitch and the stop note correspond, so it's not necessary. But whenever I use these in my composition, these kind of higher harmonics, artificial harmonics, I always notate them this way, because I think it's rather clear. And now here's the same concept but applied to pure major thirds. So for that I will play an F sharp on the first string, and then to get a pure major third, to get the A sharp that's pure, what I have to do is finger an F sharp 2 octaves below, and then actually pluck a major third higher. So this is technically a touch major third harmonic. So here is the F sharp, and here's the A sharp. These are definitely harder to do simultaneously, but again, with practice, it's entirely possible. And then the same thing from a B flat. And then from a D flat. And these, depending on how you're set up, can also be played without the right hand, actually. For example, like this. So the second method I will discuss is the use of scordatura. Now these are not traditional scordaturas. These are scordaturas that use various harmonics of a single fundamental to tune all the open strings on the guitar. And what that does is it allows you to play a rather large number of pitches that are all related to a single fundamental, because all the natural harmonics of those open strings, since they are tuned to natural harmonics, will also be natural harmonics of that same fundamental, but they will be much, much higher harmonics. So I will be discussing two compositions briefly. One of them is a piece called Diversion for Guitar Quartet, and another piece is a set of 4 etudes called 4 etudes in just intonation for solo guitar. But there are several other composers that have used this kind of method, and I listed a few here. So in this example, I show the first 7 notes of a harmonic series, starting from a note that would correspond to a note that is an octave lower than the drop D 6th string. And what I did for this piece is I tuned my 6 strings to the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th harmonic of that imaginary fundamental. Here's then another example of a piece. This is from the 4 etudes in just intonation. This one uses A as the fundamental, and this is the harmonic series. So in this case, I actually kind of moved things around a little bit more. So the 6th string was tuned to the 3rd harmonic, but of course adjusted, the octave is adjusted to fit the range that I needed. And then the 5th string is actually the fundamental, and then the 4th string is a pure major third higher, etc. But if you look at the numbers, where it says ratio, the first part of that number tells you which harmonic it is, and then the second part of that number tells you what the octave transposition is. So they are literally taken from the harmonic series, but they're, in this case at least, the octave is adjusted so that it fits the range. By playing harmonics of those strings, I now get additional harmonics from the same harmonic series. When you combine all of this together, all 6 strings, all the harmonics from the open string all the way to the 7th partial gave me this rather elaborate and highly unusual scale that you see here. And so as you can see, every single note except the A, anytime there's an A, that A is going to be a regular A. But everything else is sometimes a little bit or sometimes very, very off from the equivalent equal tempered pitch. So you end up with a very rich and very subtle kind of set of notes that you can work with. Now, the intention of this isn't to play tonal music or anything like that. It was simply to create essentially a harmonic field that then I could play around with and use it as a starting point for a composition. So I restricted myself in both of these pieces to only using harmonics, though there are pieces where I've done kind of a combination of the two, where I use fretted notes, which technically then go outside of the harmonic series in combination with the harmonics. So this is what the notation looks like. So one problem with this particular strategy is that notating the pitches for a musician, a performer to read is really a little bit difficult, in the sense that they will be rather confused if you write the sounding pitch the way that they might be used to. So what I've done instead is I notate them using a sort of like a tablature, in the sense that I write the notes as if the guitar was tuned to a regular notation. And to make it even easier, I show them where to press the notes. In other words, if I wanted to play the for instance, the 5th partial of the 6th string, rather than showing the actual sounding pitch, or even of the if it were tuned to a standard tuning, what I do instead is I actually notate a G sharp. So at the very beginning, for instance, you see that there's a G sharp on the 6th string. That's not a sounding pitch. That's where you actually touch the string. So I use the notation kind of in different ways depending on the situation. And of course, in the introduction to the piece, I explain this in detail. So here's a little bit of what it sounds like. So the third method I will discuss is the use of fretlets. So what fretlets are, they're essentially what early music performers like lute players call tastini. Tastini in Italian simply means small frets. Now, they're not necessarily small, because a fretlet can be essentially just the same size as a normal flat fret, but the difference is that it doesn't have a tang at the bottom, which means you can place it. You don't have to have a groove. You don't actually have to, hammer it in there or anything. You can just put it on the in between some of the other frets that you have, and then attach it either using a double-sided tape or perhaps glue if you really want it to stay there. So what's nice about it is that you can add frets to the ones you already have, and the other thing that's really nice about it is that you can remove them fairly easily. They're not really necessarily intended to be removed like on the fly. However, you can certainly before a concert put some fretlets on, and they stay on rather securely, and then maybe have 2 or 3 guitars, and you have different tunings available to you without having to refret a guitar completely. So they're very convenient. One thing that I will mention is that it's important that they're the right height, because if they're not, if there's a discrepancy between the height of your frets and the fretlets that you're using, it can cause problems, and so it might actually eliminate notes that you need. So there is a website where you can buy fretlets that are pre-cut and various sizes that come with the tape, and that website is run by the well-known microtonal expert guitarist John Schneider, and the website is called simplyfretlet.com. So this is what, I don't have fretlets on this guitar, but you can see in the image a guitar that has, it's actually the same guitar that I'm using now, but I attached various fretlets to just get a few extra notes. So it wasn't a major sort of shift, but it was enough to create a slightly different sonority. So specifically for that piece, which was basically just an improvisation, I put one fretlet on the second fret, and which allowed me to lower the second fret by about 14 cents. And so what that gave me is a pure major third starting from A, which in this case I considered my fundamental. So I had a pure major third from the open A, and actually any other A. And then an almost pure major sixth, and then a pure minor seventh, and then two additional pure major thirds. And then I just use those as kind of anchor points for my improvisation. So here's a little excerpt from this improvisation. The sound of that very low minor seventh. It's a very interesting sound that you don't get to hear very much normally. So I think the ability to experience pure intervals on the guitar is really rather important, in the sense that there's nothing like being able to actually hear it. I mean, one can read about it, etc., but it's much more interesting and much more useful to be able to hear it. So even though some of the methods I outlined may not be all that practical for your particular use, I think you will agree that there is certainly a difference between specialty pure thirds and equal tempered thirds. So just to give you an example of one issue you might encounter, and I encounter this all the time if I'm playing kind of traditional music, is you have a chord, and just like in a very important place in the music, like this, and then you realize that it just doesn't sound quite that consonant, or as consonant as you might think it should, right? So to me, for instance, this F major chord, which is the guitar should be pretty in tune, sounds out of tune. And what makes it sound out of tune is the fact that the third is just too sharp, which makes sense because the A is a little bit, or the equal tempered third is 14 cents sharper. So if I compare the A's, they sound in tune, but then when I play the chord, I don't have the ability to lower it the way that a string player might. So to get around the problem, of course, an easy way to do it would be to just lower the tuning of the third string. And then, you can get it slightly closer, and that already would be an improvement, but you can also find the exact tuning of that third by using the touch 3 major third harmonic. So here's now a retuned F major chord. I think you'll agree that it sounds far more consonant and resonant. So now the problem is that by lowering the third string, we've also lowered the tuning of the other notes. So some of these notes may not be as useful anymore. So for example, the C is now even lower than the equal tempered fifth. So the point is, you can find slight compromises, and of course I lowered it all the way to just major third, but you could just lower it a little bit, and even that will give you a slightly better, or actually sometimes substantially better results. So the point is, I would suggest when you're playing, of course it depends on the kind of music that you play, but music that sticks more or less to the same key, it's well worth adjusting the tuning ever so slightly to the main triads or the main chords that you're actually going to be using in the piece. so that when you get to those chords, because often it will be the last chord, for example, they will resonate far, far, far better. And of course, in addition to that, you can experiment with fretlets and other things like that, so that you can maybe have additional notes that you can use for various pieces. So I hope this was useful.